Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at another episode of Highwaymen Social. Today I have with me a very distinguished guest, Catherine Enns. She is the author of the book, The Journey of the Highwaymen. It is an amazing book on the story of the life of the highwaymen and how it relates to the relationship between Alfred E. Backus and the highwaymen. If you have not read it, it is a difficult book to get, but I strongly recommend you do it. Welcome, Catherine. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Paul.
Before we get started, Catherine, I think everyone would want to know, you grew up in Fort Pierce in the 60s and 70s, is that correct?
I did, and
You did.
Part of the 50s.
And part of the 50s, we're not going to talk about that. But so how did the book come to be? You wrote this book in conjunction with Jonathan Otto, and how did it all happen?
Well, I actually was living in Jacksonville at the time that the whole Highwayman story came out, and I was working for a magazine at the time and had written about art. I have my master's in art history, and I wrote about art in Jacksonville and very much into the art scene. And I was driving my kids to work, and there was a story on NPR about the highwaymen. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. I almost had an accident. I was like, I cannot believe this. You know, I knew all of these painters, I knew what they were doing at the time, but I had no idea that it was such an enterprise. I had no clue about it.
All of a sudden, there's this epiphany of notoriety.
I lived in Fort Pierce for a good 18 years of my life. So my editor at the time said, you know, you're from Fort Pierce, you should write an article about this. So I came down from Jacksonville and met up with Mary Ann Carroll and with Zenobia Jefferson, who, by the way, was the mom of my high school friend.
Oh.
So I had known her for quite a long time, and just what happened was just amazing to me. Well, a couple of years later, I got a phone call from one of my friends who said, you know, I know somebody who's looking for a writer because he has a collection of Highwaymen and Backus paintings. It happened to be Jonathan Otto. And we hit it off. He had a great vision about the highwaymen. He was from New York, living in Palm Beach, and he had bought a number of paintings from Howard Brasner, along with Backus paintings. And he's a computer guy, and his whole premise was that the Backus paintings were actually templates. They stood as templates for the highwaymen work, which is a good way to kind of look at it, because after you see thousands of these paintings, you realize, you know, there is a focus on each of the paintings.
Correct, there's a format that they're following. Yeah. They're following Backus's format, yeah.
Yeah. So Jonathan hired me to write the book, and so I began my journey with the highwaymen.
I see. So you meet this guy. He's a New York guy with a house in Palm Beach, and you're a writer. You know, you do okay as a writer. And what was that relationship like when you actually met him and you're going, oh, this guy really is something, and he wants me to write a book?
Well, we hit it off right away. He's just a really nice, down-to-earth person, and who had a wonderful collection of paintings. So, full disclosure, you know, I wasn't a Highwayman fan when I started out. My relationship was to being Backus. He was a friend of my family's. One of my younger brothers had taken art classes with him. I had gone to Jamaica with Beanie. I had spent hours watching Beanie paint, and in my opinion, nobody could paint the Florida landscape like Beanie Backus.
Did you sail to Jamaica or did you fly over?
Oh, we flew.
You flew.
Air Jamaica.
Yeah. Okay. The story of the Highwaymen is one of great entrepreneurial spirit, and that really is the core, the essence of the story. And the perseverance is really there within your book. It takes a really interesting look at history. What can you tell us? You were there at the times. What could you tell us about the area, the artists, and the times? I saw a Backus painting, with the marble shoot game, and it's all dirt. It's all dirt road. Mm-hmm. Was that Fort Pierce at the time?
Oh, definitely in the black neighborhood. It was for sure, dirt road. Jim Crow South permeated that area, and unfortunately, I remember the segregation. I only have an inkling of it because I was white, but for sure it was separate water fountains. When you went to the movie theater, if you were black, you had to watch from the balcony. Couldn't be on the main floor. So not until desegregation happened, and that split the community.
Did it seem normal to you at the time? Did it seem like?
No, we knew.
You knew better, yeah. But it was just the way it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
And just where I lived, because I lived on 13th Street, which was Orange Avenue, Delaware Avenue actually, separated my side of town, the white side, from the black side.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay. What do you think their lives would have been like without art, if there wasn't art in their lives? You saw segregation, you saw the Jim Crow South. What do you think the future of people like Alfred Hair and Harold Newton would be without art?
Well, I have no idea. I know that, they would have just been laborers.
Field labor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where Harold came from.
But, I think to me the most remarkable thing is that this even happened, that most of them were not well educated,
Right.
If a couple of years of elementary school. And the fact that they could do these wonderful landscapes and really come up with a business model that kind of,
made their way.
Went around all the white restrictions, the things that had been put on them societally.
Right. They made a way.
Yeah.
So your book begins with Albert E. Backus, begins with Beanie Backus, and rightfully so, because the story begins there. It begins with Backus, and then it goes back to the Highwaymen, and there. What do we know about you? You've met Backus, you've spent time with him, you flew to Jamaica with him. What did you know? What do we know about him and his childhood and his life?
Well, his childhood was, his parents got divorced when he was young. So at that time, which was kind of, early 1900s, 1920 probably.
20s, 30s, yeah.
That was a big stigma. His mom was a vaudeville performer, so music, art, just, having plays, letting the kids have fun was really what Beanie was all about. And so I think he really was free to explore the things that he wanted to do. And, he wanted to become an artist, but he joined the Navy. And he also took classes at Parsons School of Design. I don't know if he got a degree from there, but he spent some time in New York.
You say in your book that Albert Backus was colorblind to all things but art. And he invited everyone into his home. It was really, and you saw that, you experienced part of that. And many people attribute the beginning of the movement to Alfred Hair. And your book kind of focuses in that direction, but you acknowledge it was really Harold Newton. What do we know about that infancy moment, that beginning where Backus and Harold Newton meet? We know about the Harold Newton-Alfred Hair relationship, and it was good in the beginning when he was a kid, and a bit controversial because Alfred Hair wanted to paint quickly. But what do we know about the relationship between Backus and Harold? Did he just watch him paint, or did he actually learn from Backus?
Well, Beanie, as far as I know, was really the kind of teacher who let you do your own thing, and he would just paint. So everybody, when you took a class from Beanie, you would paint alongside Bean. So, and he would give you suggestions. Maybe you want to add that, or put a little white in, or come out here and look at the way that the sun is shining through the palm frond. And he met Harold, and Harold was painting on black velvet, religious paintings. Well, Bean was not a really religious person.
Yeah.
He was
right.
very Christian-like, but not.
Yes.
So, he said, no, that's not going to do. Well, Harold was a quick study, and Don Brown was Beanie's manager for
forever,
for decades. Yeah. Said that Harold would see a painting of Bean's, and he would go home and have it painted in a couple of hours, an exact
he could do it,
replica.
Yeah.
So he was, he was a talented artist, and it wasn't. I don't think anything would have stopped him, really.
Yeah. True unique talent, right? Like God-given talent, not a learned. And I think that probably is the unique thing about Harold in this movement, that he was uniquely talented, gifted, if you will, as an artist. Do we know if there's even one example of one of those velvet paintings in existence?
Oh, boy, I'm sure that there are some collectors who would love to find that.
I've never heard of one. I've never seen one. Boy, that would be a wonderful thing to see. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Harold's use of palette knife. You talk a little bit in your book about his discovery of palette knife as he sees Backus doing this palette knife thing as opposed to traditional brushwork. And then Harold gets his first palette knife. Explain all that to us. How does that work out?
Backus painted in the 40s and 50s almost exclusively with the palette knife. And so, it just gives this freedom and this expressive movement. And it's also just easier, than the paintbrush. And so he had kind of improvised a little spoon thing that he used, but he showed it to Harold, and Harold was immediately on board because, you just flick on a little bit of paint and extend it. I mean, we've all watched Bob Ross. We know what, You
don't have to clean the brush.
Yeah,
you just go on to the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is a very powerful and expressive tool.
Yeah.
You could really, you really get creative with it, but it takes a lot to learn to use a knife as opposed to a brush.
Oh, yeah.
The brush forgives a lot of sin, but the palette knife really, you either have to be, you can either wield it or you can't.
Yeah,
it's not
so true.
Not an easy tool.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Alfred Hair really represented the movement, the camp, if you will, in Fort Pierce. And Backus had his own thing going on. That was truly an effort in fine art. And Hair had this camp going on in Fort Pierce, the Avenue D group, if you will. And yet there's another campfire burning over in Gifford, okay?
That's right.
And that's, Harold and Sam and Lem and Roy and the Gifford Eight, if you will. How do those relationships come together, right? Was Backus really part of those relationships? Roy says he only saw Backus paint 4 times. and he said he only spoke to him once. So really, who's heading this thing up? The Gifford Eight, is it really Harold? As I understand in the book, it's Harold going to Backus's place to get tips from him, learning how to paint the palm fronds, how to get it right, and then bringing it back. And there's two separate groups here?
Yeah.
How does that play out?
Well, now I wasn't there, so I don't know. And, my whole purpose in telling this story is to be able to do it as accurately as possible, because time passes and history gets embellished.
Right.
But as far as I know, when any of the artists came over to Beans, they would come in, and very often Beanie would buy or give them material. And so, that is how the idea of the Upson board
started
came to be, because, Backus he himself painted on that.
Right. He also painted on canvas board. When you look at Harold's canvas board period, they're full palette knife, really rich and colorful, Backus-like painting. That explains that. So Beanie is gifting them paint and boards.
Well, and you also have to think, okay, this is Fort Pierce in the 1960s, 70s. There was only really one place where you could buy actual artists' paint, in Fort Pierce.
Right.
And I don't.
Were they allowed in?
I don't know, but I was told by Don Brown again, and I'm not sure how accurate this is, but that Beanie would buy
the supplies,
thousands of dollars in supplies for them. So, so they would come by, and and they would ask for tips, or bring something to Bean and say, what can I do? And those would have been the guys who were really interested in, becoming artists.